Cool. We got a full house, so let's go ahead and get started.
Let's do it.
Safe harbor statement. You've seen this a couple times already, so we're going to skip it. This session is all about scaling your automation impact through the use of solution patterns. If you've been following the thread of some of the sessions that Mark and I have done, we're all about this Pathfinder program, right? And as a part of the Pathfinder program, we've identified those 5 Ps, the 5 pillars of an automation program that scales. How many people know them already?
We have prizes.
Let's see.
No, we don't know.
What are they? You did raise your hand. People's one. What else?
Production. Excuse me. Sorry.
Production is one. Promotion and engagement is another one. Very good. Pipeline is another one. Yep. What are we missing? Program.
That's important.
Program is important. So this session is specifically around what you're doing with your production of automations, and this is that P. And we're going to talk about some ways that you can mature your automation development and think about the ways that you maybe take on more complex use cases as you continue to grow your automation program. As a very quick intro, my name is Micah Smith. I lead our community and learning. I used to lead an automation program at TIAA, which is a large financial services organization based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I still live there, but that was a really flowery way of saying Charlotte. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
My name's Mark Goodare. I've been with Automation Anywhere just under 5 years. So I started in professional services, and now I'm leading our internal center of excellence.
Awesome. So what we want to talk about today is really how you can put all of this stuff together, right? This is our system of work. I think they call this a marketecture, which is like architecture plus marketing. But how do we bring a lot of these things together, right? A lot of us have been creating automations that are essentially scheduled tasks. We say, hey, wake up at 1 a.m. and run this bot, or scan this directory every 15 minutes and try to bring in a file. And that's the extent of the types of automations that we create.
Right.
And we want to look at how we can start to create different types of automations that really unlock and enable a lot of these productivity benefits that we've been hearing about over the last couple days. So as we jump into this, we're going to talk about the solution pattern story. I may be going kind of quickly because we do have a lot of slides to get through, including a couple video demos. We're going to talk about the solution pattern story. We're going to talk a bit about this framework. We will also point you to some resources on our website where you can get some of this detail and see some of these in a little bit more high depth. We'll also talk about the benefits and who is benefiting through this. We'll talk about finding your own path to implementation. We'll have a conclusion, and we're going to walk through some of these solution patterns, and we want to hear from you. Is this something you're implementing already, or is this something that you might want to do a POC on? So Mark, I think really the genesis of this really came from you and some of what you've been doing on professional services, and you and I have had a lot of conversations on this over the last couple of years. So
for sure.
Give a little bit of background on what this is and where this came from.
Sure. So I think this first bullet point captures the essence of it. In professional services, we were working with many of you, many different customers. And there's some expressions that get floated around a lot. You hear things like the art of the possible. And those are good expressions. I think everyone can rally behind those kind of things. But the question comes in, yeah, but how do I actually do it? What does that actually mean in terms of using the software to achieve a certain benefit or an outcome? So we saw a need pretty quickly with all the diversity of use cases. I mean, some of you, if we were to look at the use cases you've already implemented, you see many different types of complexity and using different parts of the product. But what we wanted to do is come up with a simpler language for how we can describe how an automation is actually going to work. This second point is really, really relevant. If you listen to the keynotes, hopefully everyone caught those. You can see that automation is definitely trending towards the user experience side of the house. Right? If we were to look at traditional RPA or the kind of automations many of us were familiar with even just a few years ago, there wasn't so much of a user experience side of it, right? As Micah said,
it's hidden. It's a scheduled task.
100%. Yeah. It was something happened at 3 a.m. last night, and now I have a spreadsheet. That kind of thing, right? You look at what's happening with Copilot. All of a sudden, now our business users are actually interacting with the automation, and that opens a whole new sphere of possibilities and also some challenges. So how do we simplify this core question for the stakeholders? How will the automation success platform actually enable my use case? We're going to talk about that in a second, but and I'm sure many of you are already aware of this, but when you're delivering a use case, you don't have one or two stakeholders. You got a number of different stakeholders, right? If you think about how the platform is going to enable your use case. We've got somebody that's hopefully going to receive some benefit from it, what we would call in Pathfinder the
Impact.
Yes, but the consumer of the automation,
Oh,
right?
yeah, as
In
far
the
as the
seats?
C.
Yes. So
Missed
who's
that.
going
I
to
missed that
consume it? We've got somebody that's going to build it, but that's not enough. Then we've got a control room aspect of it and technical architecture. So we've got these different roles and responsibilities. It really does take a little kind of mini team when we're delivering automation. What I think you'll see is that when we answer this solution pattern question, it answers questions for kind of everyone that's involved in it in terms of understanding how it's going to work.
So let's start to break this up, and I'm going to put some of these objects on screen so we can start to think through this. So if we think about what a solution pattern is, what we're trying to do here is have consistent language and thought patterns to the types of automations that we're creating. We're almost like classifying these because we want to understand, how does it execute? Where does it run? How is it invoked? Those kind of questions enable us to start to create categorizations for our automations. So the first question we have listed on here is, how does it start? Talk me through some of the ways that automations can be invoked.
Yeah, so if we're talking about trigger-based automations, we've got automations that happen when an email arrives. We've got automations that happen when you move a file around. We talked about scheduling. We've got automations that run based on a date or time schedule. We've got automations that happen on demand. When I press this button, including embedded, which we'll get into, so I invoke it kind of manually on demand. Workload management. APIs is a good one, right? Some external system can even call an API and invoke a bot. So those are all basically ways of invoking an automation.
The next point is, how does it execute? And this is really about where it's running.
Yes. And this one, you'll see, I don't directly work for the product team, but you're going to see this one evolving in some interesting ways. So when we talk about how does it execute, or another way of putting that would be, where does it execute? We're talking about, is it right in front of me? So is it on the machine that I'm logged into right now? Is it happening over there on some remote runner or device pool? And desktop automation and process automation. When we talk about Copilot, we've got a differentiation there between desktop automation and process automation. So that's all about, where does the action actually happen? Where does the automation run?
API tasks is another really interesting one that's been introduced a lot this week.
Yes.
An API task, where does that execute, right? It's in some container someplace. So
Exactly.
there's a really interesting dichotomy there. And then finally, what's the user experience? Talk to me about this one.
Right. So this is another one that, again, 10 years ago, maybe this wouldn't have been a good question, but it is now. What's the actual experience? So you'll see some of these ones with Copilot. For example, it can be embedded directly in my application. And what application? Well, we can talk about that, but there's different options even for where it can actually sit, because ultimately, hopefully everyone's got that message about Copilot. We're basically bringing the automation to you or to the business user that wants to invoke it. So we've got those options. We've got these ones that are in the background. We still support those. We're going to be doing a demo in another session later on. It uses a lot of heavy use of generative AI, but it's one of these background ones. It runs on a schedule. That made sense, but it's still using generative AI. And then things like workload management, for those of you that are using WLM.
Very cool. So those three components together, how does it start? How does it execute? And what's the experience? Really are what we use to define these different solution patterns that we're going to talk about. There's been a lot of teasing of what these are. We're going to get to them here in just a second. So talk to me about the solution pattern decision and how I come to a point of deciding what solution pattern this is and what that means for me.
Right. So what we're talking about here is if we talk from the standpoint of benefits, why do we even care about having a framework like this? I think unlocking innovation is a big one. Many of you might be able to relate to this. You get stuck in a certain pattern, like you look at any business requirement and immediately think, what's the schedule? I don't know how many have been there. You don't have to raise your hand, but we've all been there where you find yourself stuck in that. So unlocking innovation, what if every time somebody brought a requirement to you, this is what goes on in my brain, when somebody brings a requirement, I'm now thinking about the different solution patterns. I don't always go to my favorite one. I now have a better idea of really what the universe looks like in terms of different possibilities. Consistency in language. So within our automation program, within Automation Anywhere, you can imagine what's one of the key questions. Anytime someone brings a requirement, we immediately start tossing this around. What pattern are you thinking? You can compare and contrast. Well, we could embed it into Salesforce, but there's also potential for it to run on a schedule, and how are we going to handle exceptions? So it's changed the way that we talk about the use case. And then ultimately streamlining things like development, maturing automation holistically. What that means is that if we understand all the different solution patterns that are available, back to the Pathfinder concept, we can go from start into even more compelling high impact experiences with Accelerate and on to scale, basically by evolving the type and the set of solution patterns that we're using.
Yep, I like that a lot. And I think this maturing automation maturing automation holistically is a really important point, right? Because a lot of automation programs will start with the low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
They'll do that through scheduled task-based automations. And then they kind of get stuck in that dichotomy of saying everything has to be a scheduled task. So I have to think of everything in the lens of what time can it run? How can I invoke it? Things like that.
Yes.
We really want to mature to a point beyond that so you can start to take on different types of use cases and new opportunities.
So we're going to dive more into this bit on the right in a moment, but these are some examples of the different kind of stakeholders involved in that decision.
Yeah.
We'll give you an example.
So let's jump into this. I'm going to start to bring some of these up. Let's talk about each of these roles and the kind of question we're asking and answering here.
Right. So first of all, these don't map directly necessarily to people or individuals that are involved in the automation in your organization. There might be different people wearing different hats. But if we think about it, we make a solution pattern decision. We've got somebody probably in your organization that's doing the intake analysis. Like, who's the person that's actually understanding from the business or from those consumers what the automation needs to do? That's a stakeholder of the decision. The technical architect. So regardless of what you call this individual, somebody needs to be thinking about, do we have enough capacity? Do we have enough runners set up? Do we need more? Are we going to use a device pool or individual devices? Are there performance requirements we need to consider? So there's a technical architecture piece. Who is administering the control room? Once we understand these different patterns, you'll see that things like the users and roles and licensing all also depends on the solution pattern we choose. For sure, the consumer, so basically who's ever consuming or getting the benefit from the automation, they're certainly interested in what the solution pattern is that we choose.
Yeah, how do we interact with it?
Absolutely. Who's going to be testing it? If you tell me the pattern involves workload management, I'm going to run different tests than if it's going to be embedded in Salesforce, for example, or if it's going to be a schedule automation.
Right.
And finally, last, obviously, but not least, who's actually going to build the thing? They certainly want to know what the solution pattern is because there's design and development implications to whatever pattern you choose.
All right, so that was a lot of teas for all of these solution patterns. This is a slide that has all of them on here. Now, we're not going to go through every single one of these, but what we want to talk about here is that these are all the different types of automations that you can be creating using the Automation Success Platform. You'll see some of these that probably look pretty familiar and appear to be pretty obvious just based on their naming, right?
Yes.
On the far left-hand side here, run remote via schedule. How many people are creating automations that run on schedules right now? Everyone, right? I mean, that's what we all start with because that's the easiest one. It makes the most sense. But there's also opportunities to run remote on demand, right? There are use cases for when that actually does make sense.
Sure.
Run remote via API, conversational run remote via API. Let's talk from the top down real quick. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's talk about the two top categorizations, right?
Sure.
We think about no human input, which seems like it would conflict here, but we're gonna clarify that. And then we also have human in the loop. So with no human input, we've got 3 blue blocks there. Talk me through those and why we created those the way that we did.
Sure. So I think the first thing is that the left side is probably most of our comfort zone. In fact, the first 2 are probably most of our comfort zone. I think some of us have not experimented too much with workload management. But most of I'd say the traditional automations that we're familiar with probably live in those first 2. With workload management, there are some really, really interesting patterns. And one thing I want to say here is, in my time in professional services, in my time with running this program within Automation Anywhere, I haven't implemented all these patterns. That's actually not the point. The point is more that they're possible and they've got their place, right? There are certain situations where you could use them. So I think broadly speaking, the left-hand side is the stuff that doesn't relate to Copilot. It's basically the idea is you've got what you need to invoke it. I mean, if you're going to invoke something at 3 a.m. when hopefully most of us are sleeping, it can't rely on a lot of manual entry from a human. So that's the stuff on the left-hand side.
Before we jump over, let's clarify the attended plus no human input. Talk to me about the decision there.
Sure. So we put a lot of thought into this, and if you think about things like unattended and attended, that pretty much models the way that we license, right? So if you think about when do I need an attended license, so for example, business user is going to run something on their local machine, that would be an attended runner license, whereas unattended, where it's running remotely, that would be an unattended license. It pretty much lines up with that.
Okay. All right, so let's jump over to the right-hand side here. And now we're introducing human in the loop, which for the most part is Copilot.
Yes.
Talk to me about some of these blue boxes here.
Yes. So desktop automation and process automation, these areas, if you saw everything that's coming with in the keynotes, you'll see that these are major advancements that are happening. One of the reasons that you'll see on the right-hand side, and this is kind of cool, you won't see language like is it running locally or remote on the right-hand side, if you look carefully. On the left-hand side, there's things like run remote, meaning it's running on some runner that I'm not logged into right now. Run local means it's running right in front of me. You won't see that language on the right-hand side. The reason is because we're bringing more and more flexibility to that, which is kind of cool. So if those of you that have experimented with what we used to call AIRI processes or Copilot processes, they're coming to you locally soon. You'll be able to run them on a local machine, which is going to unlock some possibilities. Currently, that would be all remote, right? With Copilot, all that executes on a remote pool. We actually sat down with the product team to make sure that this thing isn't going to need a revision next week. This actually represents something that's kind of future-proof for everything that we can see on the product roadmap right now. So desktop automation, generally speaking, this is the kind of stuff that's a combination of task bots and forms. Process automation, we're using that composer in our product to actually orchestrate a process.
Great. Yeah. So this feels very overwhelming. Yes, there seems like a lot of this, right? So within the Pathfinder program, what we talk about is there's this concept of start, accelerate, and scale.
Yes.
And that represents where your program is from a maturity standpoint in these key areas. So if you're just getting started, let's talk about some of the key solution patterns that you need to be focusing on.
Absolutely.
The first one is all of our favorites, run remote via schedule, right? This is what we're already doing. This is the bread and butter of many of your automation programs. This is the one we're most familiar with. For each of these solution patterns, we want to talk about how is it initiated, where is it executed, and how can it be used. And with how can it be used, we're going to talk about some examples or some use cases where this would apply. So break this one down for us real quick.
Yeah, so run remote via schedule, if you look at the words of that, first of all, it's running remotely. It's not running right in front of me. It's definitely on some remote runner or some remote device pool. And via schedule, we all know that piece of it. In the control room is where we're going to maintain that schedule. So that's how the actual execution is going to happen. In terms of usage, anytime we've got those situations where I need the output consistently and based on a certain date and time schedule, we got tons of examples within our own organization. In fact, one of the demos we're going to show, a short demo, is going to do that with generative AI, which is important. Even these kind of old patterns that we're all used to, even in the new ecosystem with all this Copilot and stuff, this stuff will still have its place, right? Things that need to run on a certain date or time schedule.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll skip over that one because everyone knows that really well. The next is run remote on demand.
Yeah, so run remote on demand, it's not based on a schedule. This is an example where I'm going to go into the control room, for example, and I'm going to invoke it whenever I want to, right? So if you think about ad hoc requests, welcome to run remote on demand. We use this a lot. We did a major implementation of a new finance system. Some of you that have probably used automation to help you with things like migrations and data transformation, implementing a new system, this is probably what you used. We use this extensively for that.
Yeah, and so this is the stuff that's kind of infrequent, but automated, right?
Yes.
So maybe I need to run it quarterly. I run it at the end of every week, but I have to wait till the workload is done or something like that. These are run on demand.
Yes.
Okay. The next one, again, we're just talking about start phase right now. So these are the three that we would say, hey, get warmed up with these, know how to build these, and have some familiarity here.
So run local on demand, it's also got its place in the world. Run local on demand, this gets used a lot in places like call centers. So I want to run the automation on the machine I'm logged into right now. So one of the key things here is you can use your existing infrastructure. Well, that's important, right? So if you've got a staff, a large number of people, they've all got laptops or their own machines, no need to invest in a bunch of separate VMs because all the action happens on the local device. So we have lots of these situations with call centers, including with functionality that we have that's picture-in-picture. I don't know how many of you have actually used that, but it's running locally, but you can run it in its own separate window so that it's not interrupting the work that you're doing. You can continue to operate the machine. The automation is just running in a little window. Yeah. That's run local on demand.
And that uses some of the virtualization capabilities of Microsoft's desktop.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So as you start to think through getting to the accelerate phase, right? We've gotten through the bread and butter, typical automations that we've all created. We want to start to think about run remote through API. And this is where we start to think about more fully integrated digital solutions.
Yes.
Maybe I have a workflow or a case management platform. And there are certain steps within that workflow or certain steps within that case management platform that I want to automate, but I may not be able to automate them in that platform. And so this is where I would invoke Automation Anywhere to actually execute that automation. The nice thing about this is I do have the ability to send that task to a remote device or device pool, and I can actually send input data to the automation and get output data coming back out. So if there are certain values I need to pass to the automation, the case ID, the identifier of the individual, whatever it might be, anything that I define as an input variable for that particular automation is fair game for me to map data to so that I can use that within my automation execution. how are you guys using this at Automation Anywhere?
Yes, so we've got we are actually spending a lot of time with this pattern right now, and it's with a slight variant of it. You'll see in the solution pattern modeling framework, you'll see it's run remote through API conversational. So we've integrated a lot of automations with a chatbot platform. That's something that we're doing right now. We wanted to provide an experience that's kind of a self-help for things like IT requests. We've got a chatbot platform. Sometimes the user just needs an answer. We can use things like generative AI. Sometimes what they're asking for needs an automation to run. So I'm going to show you a demo of the run remote through API version that's conversational, right? Because that's a little bit different, because basically we've got users invoking it from a chatbot platform. Depending on what they're asking, I'm going to run a different API, run a different bot through API. And before we run the demo, just pause for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Let me just give one quick caveat. The objective of showing these demos is not so much to dive into exactly what the use case is. Actually, I'm doing a session at 3:15. We're showing some of these in detail. We're going to talk about what the business problem was and everything. The objective here is just to show you how the solution pattern looks, or how it works. Hopefully that's clear. So I've got a little demo here of the conversational one. So what this was we wanted to give the ability to our employees to quickly book a meeting. So I need a half hour of Micah's time. That actually comes up sometimes. So we can go onto a chatbot platform. This is a third-party chatbot program. It's going to ask for a few inputs. Who do you want to meet with? I want to meet with Micah. You can provide a subject for it. It actually provides a generative AI-generated meeting agenda based on what you want to talk about. But the important thing is, how does it know when Micah's available? First of all, and then once I've got an appropriate time slot, actually booking the meeting, that's all bots. So you'll see it here. Would you like to have an agenda included? It's asking all of these questions. Time availability and actually booking the meeting, that's API calls to automations. So those are kind of cool possibilities. We call that one meeting meet.
All right. The next one is a very, first off, how many people are doing the run remote via API right now? Integrating API. So look around the room, right? Significantly fewer people have gone to the point of starting to create integrations with their automation platform and other applications. So this is a great first step to mature into. Start to look for some of those examples of where you can start to create those integrations. We have videos on how to use the Control Room API to invoke automations. They're very simple. We've got Postman collections that are available, so you can just test that out. The guy who did the video, incredibly handsome, charming. So yeah, go on our YouTube.
Not always on time.
Yeah, not always on time. Go to our YouTube. We have videos on that. If you have questions, you can reach out to us. But there are videos on how to set that up and how to use that to invoke an automation. All right, the next one we want to talk about is run remote via API using WLM. So this is another flavor of a similar invocation.
Absolutely. So workload management, for those of you that are not aware, workload management is when we want to distribute our workload. We've got a big workload. We want to distribute it across a number of devices. For example, we got service level requirements. The requests need to be completed within X hours. Got a high volume. I've got a pool of devices, and I just wanted to distribute that workload across those devices. So I've worked with customers on things like this. With just one piece of the process has got 80 bot runners processing transactions. So, and we have other cases where it's into the hundreds. The key here is run remote via API means that those work items are being added to queues to be processed from some external entity. An API call happens, and that's putting things on the queue, on the WLM queue, and then they're getting processed. So that's an interesting pattern.
We used a very similar pattern at TIAA. We would get a bank load file every Monday morning.
Yes.
Sometimes that would have 500 records in it. Sometimes it would have 5,000 records in it. Those are two very different units of work. Mm-hmm. So if we were to run those on a single bot runner, that could take us 8 hours, right? But if we're able to multi-thread this work by using WLM, now we're able to spread that work out across a number of bot runners.
Yes.
And it's essentially multi-threading our tasks across a pool or like an army of devices that can process this work.
Absolutely.
All right. Anyone using WLM here? Okay, so like 4. Again, look around. This is the kind of things that you want to be maturing into. This is already included in your licensing, right? Yes. So this is not like a hard sell from either of us. No. This is something you already have access to. So at the very least, leaving this session, consider what POCs you might want to create, just so you have some background on these different types of automations. And so that as you're going to talk to business stakeholders or hearing about opportunities for automation, you can think like, oh yeah, we could actually do this through an API integration, or absolutely. WLM would come into play here.
Yeah, huge for use with document automation, right? I've got to process tons of documents. One bot runner's not enough.
Perfect. All right. Let's move on to the scale phase. So at the scale phase, we would expect that you have either purposely skipped over some of those other solution patterns or you have specific needs to get here. Now, the reason we've put these in the scale phase is because they can be slightly more complex, right? If someone said, hey, I just got Automation Anywhere, what should I build for my very first automation? Probably not this, right? I mean, only because it's going to be a little bit more complex, and we want you to start with that stuff that can feel a bit more comfortable, but have aspirations to mature into something like this. And so we call this the I've always wished this app could, because we're talking about integration. So talk to me a little bit about this embedded experience.
Yeah, this is huge. It's back to Copilot. It's back to that whole aspect of how do we provide a really, really compelling experience for the business users. That word friction, how do we reduce the friction in people actually invoking the automation? And this is a great one for it. I've got a demo video for this one as well. What this one is talking about is embedding in a collaborative app. So an example of that would be Microsoft Teams. That's the platform that we use within Automation Anywhere to collaborate. Pretty cool that while I'm chatting with Mike, I can also think, oh shoot, I got to run an automation. I don't have to leave Teams. It's all embedded within Teams. So we've started to use that within Automation Anywhere. We have a program, we call it Automation for Everyone. And so these are automations that we're thinking about that are not just for the marketing department or for finance. We're trying to think about what's a cool use case that literally any employee could take advantage of. And so this has been wonderful for that. And I've got a demo of it. So basically this solution pattern is, imagine a Copilot process. It's orchestrating between task bots and forms, but the whole experience is in Teams. That's basically what this is.
Let's talk about these components down here.
Sure.
Right? There's really 3 things that make this up. Well, actually 4, because you've got the embedded. But we've got a task bot, right?
One or more.
Probably more than one.
Yep.
We have this process.
Yes.
And this is through our process orchestrator, right?
Correct.
And then we have these forms.
Yes.
Has everyone here used the form builder capability in Automation Anywhere? A little bit more hands, right? It's a drag and drop form builder. You can build whatever custom forms you want, have strings, have file uploads, take credentials. There's lots of different ways that you can take in this data, securely reference it, and use it within your process. Your process is really what's orchestrating the connection between these forms, which I would say represent a human task, and these bots, which would represent an automated task, right? And so you're creating that process here, although initiated through, in this case, an embedded application. One other thing I do want to touch on that I think is a really important differentiator here. Talk about the context, right?
Yeah, that's an important context.
I can't read other chats here, so talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's a really, really important topic. So if you think about it this way, every automation can either be invoked within the context of a business application or a transaction or not. So in fact, we're going to have a demo of both. This one, when we talk about these automations, they don't have any context. So for example, when we talk about context for booking a meeting, there's not really any context. I just need to book a meeting with Micah. That's different than we need to automate something related to an opportunity we're pursuing that's a screen in Salesforce. Those automations are actually reading from the screens of the business system. So they exist within the context of a specific business application on a specific screen. These ones that we're hosting using this solution pattern, run it whenever you want. There's no context. It's not like it's reading your Teams messages. It's just Teams is just an easy way to serve up the automation so that everyone can get to them easily.
Right, and so what we see in the screenshot, I don't want to beat this one up too much. We see the different processes that I've defined here, right?
Yes.
I would click on one and I would be presented with the form.
They're going to see it, yeah.
Okay, and that form would then enable the invocation of that process, which would then subsequently run automations.
Exactly.
Let's click on this.
So this is one of the Automation for Everyone use cases. This one's going to be shown in a lot of detail at 3:15. But again, the key here is the user's in Microsoft Teams. They've been chatting with someone. They can easily pop up the automation. And now you're looking at a Copilot form. But you haven't left Teams. The whole experience is within Teams. No need to leave it. And that's back to this concept of system of work that's been presented as well, right?
Yeah. And in that case, you're showing multiple forms, right?
Absolutely.
So you're able to go through and ask for subsequent questions.
Yeah, that Copilot process can be as complicated as you want. There could be 50 different forms, but no need to leave Teams.
Maybe not a great user experience, but
50 forms, no.
Yeah. All right. The next one is Copilot process embedded in a business application running on demand.
Right.
It rolls off the tongue, and I'm sure you'll all remember this one distinctly. This is the now I don't have to leave this page of the solution patterns. Talk to me about this.
Right.
How is it invocated? Where does it execute?
Yes.
What do I have as far as context?
So these embedded patterns, we just talked about the one where I'm embedded in a collaborative app. Again, Microsoft Teams is a good example of that, the kind of application that we collaborate with colleagues for. This one is, now I'm embedded in a business application. So I'm bringing the automation to Salesforce, I'm bringing it to Workday, I'm bringing it to ServiceNow, whatever that application is. So now the automation's coming directly within one of those business applications as opposed to a collaborative app. Same thing that Micah was mentioning, the key ingredients are the same. It's a process that's orchestrating between different forms and task plots, but now it's served up directly within the business application. And what that means is that now we've got context because, well, where are you in the application? Again, if we were to talk a Salesforce example, which we will be in some of these use cases, I'm looking at a specific opportunity. The automation makes sense only in the context of that opportunity. It's processing something to do with that opportunity.
I like that. Talk to me a little bit about the different ways that we can have that embedded in Salesforce, because you have a couple options here, right?
Yeah, we've got multiple options here, and this again depends on the system.
Yep.
Right. So we've got extensions if it's any kind of web-based application within systems like Salesforce. There's also several options. iframes, for example.
Yeah. So specifically with Salesforce, I've got the ability to grab an app off the App Exchange. That's one from Salesforce. I could use iframe embeds to be able to, again, embed these forms and embed that experience directly into the Salesforce interface.
Yes.
I also have the ability to use Copilot extensions.
Yes.
And with Copilot extensions, I can really customize how this looks and how users can interact. So I can actually create an extra button here if I wanted to. And I could deploy that and roll that out to my users. I also have the ability to have sidebars and modals pop up and things like that. So I can really customize the user experience on these applications.
Agreed.
One other question I do want to ask on this before we move on to showing this demo. Talk to me about what needs to be installed for the end user here, right? Do they have to have a bot runner, a bot agent installed locally, or what's the deal?
No. So that's one of the nice things about several of these solution patterns is there's all that overhead doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So Copilot extensions, for example, that's just a plugin into Chrome. As long as it's a web-based application hosted in Chrome, that's it. So there actually isn't a lot of overhead that you need on the
And I think
devices.
that's really important when we think about these types of solution patterns that we're looking to mature to. I don't have to have the bot agent installed on everyone's machine or anything like that, especially if I'm just deploying an iframe here. I publish that. I do my provisioning for permissions in Salesforce for this example, and users are able to use it. They don't have to know anything about automation anywhere. They don't really have to know anything about anything besides just what's going on in this form. Are there tasks that are coming back to them? Are they invoking an automation?
Absolutely.
And this is just their way of getting work done.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about this demo.
So here's an example. This is an automation. So this is one we gave our account executives. Uses generative AI. This is actually a pretty cool use case, but park that for the moment. If I'm an account executive, I'm already looking at an opportunity. This whole sidebar, this basically all represents Copilot. These drop-down lists, some of them auto-populate directly from the screen, right? I don't need to know the client name, for example, because it's already coming from the screen. On the sidebar, it's now processing. So again, the account executives, at least our account executives, spend most of their time here, bringing the automation right to them. They can invoke it and get their output on the screen here, or we can send it separately. In some of these cases, we attach it directly to the opportunity, for example.
One last point I would like to make here. The forms that you saw populating here, I could publish this same process into this app. I could also publish it into
Somewhere
Teams.
else. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if there's not context involved, you can literally publish it anywhere. Put it in Teams and put it in Salesforce and put it in whatever your application is. Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great. All right. I think this is the last one we're going to talk about at the scale phase. Now, there are more at the scale phase. They can get more complex.
Sure.
They can get a little bit more esoteric to say that finding a particular use case for them would be much rarer. Not to say that it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this. Unattended plus Copilot process.
Yeah.
This is the phone a friend of automations. Tell me about this, and let's talk about some examples.
So this one, the minute you learn about generative AI, this one becomes one of your best friends. Because what this is talking about is that I've got kind of a happy path for how things are typically going to operate. But when I've got a process exception, I need to involve a human, then I'm going to launch a Copilot request for it. Well, if you think about what we talk about with generative AI, this whole idea of human in a loop is actually a pretty important concept, right? Because can you fully trust that the results are exactly what you want? You might just be experimenting. I'll give you a perfect example. In fact, the one that we're demoing here, when everything's fine in the requests, it all gets automatically processed. The tone of the message changes, right? The tone of a message I'm getting from a customer, the tone of a message I'm getting from a supplier changes. We need to invoke Copilot to bring in the humans into the process. That's exactly what that is. So it's a typical unattended automation. For example, it could be running every day at 3 a.m. But if something funny happens, if there's a process exception, then I'm invoking Copilot so that they can resolve that exception.
I think another really easy example of this is with document automation, right? My document automation process is kind of 5 steps. I've got the intake process. I've got a classification where I want to understand what type of image or form this is. I've got the extraction process. So based on the classification, what do I need to extract? I've got the validation step, and I've got the delivery step. I have exceptions that can happen a couple places there. If I don't get high confidence on my classification, I want someone to look at it to validate, perfect the results of that classification. I can straight through process from there possibly, but if I don't get a great result on my extraction or it fails my validation rules, I want to get someone involved to take a look at that. So there will be some forms that go straight through processing. There will be others where I need a human to kind of play the backstop to the automation.
Absolutely. And again, we're using this internally, obviously. I think the demo we're about to show is a good example. But again, that Copilot, the fact that whoever's going to process the exception, again, we're bringing those exceptions right to them. So if they spend most of their time in Workday, that's where they're going to process their exceptions. If they're in Teams, that's where we're going to bring it. So,
okay, let's talk through this one.
Yeah. So this is a demo of exactly this. So this is a use case where suppliers are sending requests to our accounts payable team. What do suppliers typically want? Things like, when am I going to get paid? That's a pretty standard question. And so the automation is running in an unattended manner. It's receiving those requests and processing them, doing some interesting things with generative AI. But for example, things like sentiment and tone are analyzed. And when the sentiment or tone changes in a way that we're no longer comfortable with, then it's bring in the humans, and off it goes to make a request in Copilot. So in this case, that's where our accounts payable team used to manually respond to every request. Now, 97% of them are automatically processed, and they're literally just dealing with the exceptions in Copilot.
Cool.
So great for generative AI.
All right. So this is perfect timing because we will have a little bit of time for questions here. Let's talk about next steps. Number 1, check out the different frameworks. Familiarize yourself with these different frameworks that are available. Consider doing a proof of concept on those. You saw from your peers in this room, moving to API tasks is the next best step for many of you. At least doing a POC on that so you're aware of the capabilities. You've got that in your repertoire of bot automation builds. So think about that. Think about optimizing your opportunity assessment intake, right? How are you taking in opportunities? How are you classifying them against the types of automations that you can create? And get in the habit of doing that. That will help accelerate the way that you do documentation, the way that you set up your test cases, the way that you do support documentation or your run books.
Managing the control room, right?
Yeah.
What access do we set up?
Absolutely. And then the last one is, obviously we kind of mentioned this already, but start a new proof of concept. I hope you were motivated by some of the interesting ways you can think about automations being invoked and executed through this session. But think about how you can create some POCs on these new solution patterns. This is a great way to encourage your developers to learn new things, take on a new challenge. This is also great to inspire business stakeholders. So you can show them some of this capability of being able to go back and forth between these applications. And this is great for your program evangelism. If I want to talk to business stakeholders in my organization and get them excited about some of our capabilities, showing them a real live working demo is one of the most compelling ways to do that.
Absolutely.
If you scan this QR code, is this working? I hope it is. Good.
Awesome.
So if you scan this QR code, this will take you to a community page where we have a breakdown of many of the solution patterns. We haven't put all of them up there yet,
Quite a few
but we are going to be breaking down all the rest of them there. So if you want to see examples of exactly what this is, where it works, how it runs, we will put that there. We're also going to be sharing some documentation templates for some of those things, as well as some frameworks. And we can put some frameworks up there. The frameworks really don't change a whole lot in between some of these different patterns, but there can be some variations of that.
Yeah.
All right. That gives us 5 to 7 minutes for questions.
Awesome.
What can we clarify? Yes, sir.
I love the idea of a Teams chatbot, and I've seen a few examples of that so far at the event. But my main
We
concern.
can repeat it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going. You're pretty loud, so you're good.
Yeah. So my main concern with the concept of something like a Teams chatbot, where you want to be more conversational and immediate, is if your unattended runner is bogged down or your queue is doing other tasks. So how do you prevent that? How do you make sure that you don't have lag time between the prompt and the response on those bots?
Thank you. It's a great question. I'll sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, wait, I have a mic.
No, yeah, I was gonna say you already have one.
No, it's a great question. I think one of those. So the answer to part of that is you really, really need to pay attention to what capacity you have. So when we release these like automation for everyone kind of automations, we actually put some thought into what kind of capacity we need. So how big does the pool need to be? So we make some estimates in terms of how many users are likely to run it, how many simultaneous requests are we likely to have, so we make sure that we size the pool properly. I think that's the first thing. And we monitor that pretty closely, not just from a system standpoint, but obviously from a user experience standpoint as well, right? If users say, hey, I'm trying to run that automation, but it seems to just queue, then we know we're probably insufficiently sized. That's number one. Number two is, I think API tasks are going to be a game changer for that as well. With API tasks, for those of you that are aware, first of all, they're not running on a device, they're running on the server. So that issue of, to your point, of having that constraint goes away. And also response time, right? If you're interacting with a chatbot, who wants to wait 25 seconds for a response? So if there's that kind of back and forth, API tasks are going to completely revolutionize that and unlock a lot of these. But these ones that we've done, the way that we did it was we tried to make sure that we get whatever the input is initially through some simple back and forth and make sure that we've got everything we need for the automation to run. And then if it does take 20 seconds to book the meeting, they've already moved on, it's no problem.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is that's an operational metric, right?
Sure.
I mean, we talk about the types of metrics you want to be capturing as a program: business value metrics, operational metrics,
Yep.
and delivery metrics.
Sure.
Operational metrics would say, how long did it take for someone to invoke this process and the process actually execute, right? If I can
Right.
capture those kind of times, that can be an indicator of how responsive our program
Agreed.
is
Agreed.
for these. Yes, sir. Jim Frost, stand up. Be loud. Yeah, there you go.
Not that loud, yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, if you're in a business system and you're asking, or you're running a Copilot that's contextual.
Guys.
So for example, if you're saying on this lead, I want to run this bot, do you have to stay in that item in that system until the response comes back, or can you go to another one, trigger another question, et cetera?
That's a great question. So, and that's obviously really relevant to what we were just showing for the account executives. So there's a couple things there. You don't have to stay there. So there's an aspect of the automation design in terms of what does the output look like and where is it going. So we've done that in a few different ways. And one of the ways we've done it is that so there's a notification when the process is complete to the account executive. But the output, for example, gets attached back into the business system. Right? Exactly, it gets attached back there. So that way they're not forced to sit there and wait. And then it's also back to your point about, if they're waiting 15 seconds, people are generally patient. But if it's a long-running process, like the example I showed, we're going to prepare a whole pitch deck. We're going to prepare a whole customized PowerPoint presentation. It'll take a few minutes. So in cases like that, we send them a notification to say, check your opportunity. Here's a link to your opportunity. It's attached already. Exactly. So it just takes a little thought from a design standpoint about how to serve the output up in the best way. Exactly, where to put it.
Yeah, but
Good
the user
question.
does not have to stay there.
No,
Even if
no.
it's embedded or if it's
It's
a
not going to
Copilot
stop running
extension.
it
Yeah.
won't stop running if they move
You're
away.
getting to the point where you're triggering that automation through the control room API. The process takes over from there.
Correct.
If there are subsequent tasks that are created for the user, they would show up in that user's task
Yes.
on the embedded component. So
Yes.
they'll be able to see that, or they
Yes.
could go directly to the Copilot page.
Yes.
There's another question next to Jim. Sorry, I should have stayed back there. All right, go ahead.
When embedding, will still work on mobile or on a desktop?
You want me to answer this?
You go for it.
So if you embed it through an iframe, it would, technically, as long as you've done some responsive design, it would technically still work even on a mobile device. The Copilot extension would only be available on desktop, though it would be available across operating systems. So
Right.
if you wanted to do that on users who are using Mac OS as well as Windows, if they're using Copilot extension, or if they're using embedded, that would work. For the Copilot embedded, which is the iframe, that would work, again, on either operating system, but it should also work on mobile.
Yes.
As long as that web application supports iframes being displayed on the mobile device. All right, we'll take one more if it's a quick one. Okay, you promised it's a quick one.
It was never a quick one. And I'm changing the topic too. I was just wondering, how does support look like with all these bots? It's like you keep on building and then it's a totally different area, automation anywhere. So I'm just curious about how does support look like if you are developing all these patterns. It's a loaded question.
So one thing that we talk about is as you go through from start to accelerate to scale, you're going to mature the way that you're doing things like your documentation. We encourage the creation of what we would call a run book. And a run book is basically support documentation for someone who's going to be supporting this automation. So where can it fail? How can you fix it? What are some common errors? Things like that. I want to document those things. I also want to make sure that as my automation design and development matures, I'm maturing the way that I think about error handling, trapping errors, things like that, so that I'm familiar with the types of errors that are being generated and how my automation can resolve.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you guys are doing error
Yeah.
resolution right now, because I think
So-
you're doing it really well.
So one other thing that we're doing along the lines of what Mike is talking about is it's almost like these automations become an extension of the business system. So within Automation Anywhere, somebody's got an issue related to a Salesforce Copilot. My team doesn't get a call immediately. The team that's supporting Salesforce gets the first call. So they've been kind of trained that think of all these automations, they're embedded within your application, so you're the first stop. Why is that relevant? Well, maybe there's something related to the data in the system, maybe there's something related to what's actually happening in that business application that's affecting the outcome. So they're kind of step one, they're kind of like the first tier of support. And then, no, it's something deeper than that, it's not related to the business system, then it comes over to another support organization. But it's a good question. I think it is true that there are maybe more failure points in some patterns than others. If you think about it from that standpoint, if you do failure point analysis, there's a few more places for things to break. But
That's
we've
another
actually,
operational metric.
exactly. but we found, again, these automations that we're running in production now, we found them pretty resilient, which has been good.
We should have just said automations never fail and ended the session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone so
Thank
much
you.
for joining this. Again, we have
Thanks,
that QR
everyone.
code.
Thank you.
Do this feedback one too. I don't think, have we put that up at all?
Yes.
All right.
No.
Scan the feedback thing. Give feedback. If this was horrible, give that feedback.
If it was horrible, please
If it was
exit
mildly
through.
entertaining, yeah, you can give that feedback as well. Thanks, guys.